Use some light out here, couldn't I? Hi, you're watching Taking It Black. I'm your host. I'm attorney Valerie Hicks Hale. So glad to have you join us. I recognize I'm about 6 minutes late today. Ran from church, did not do a pre-recorded program, had all the information for the program. Just thought I'd have enough opportunity to upload it before uh, the time for the program to broadcast. I apologize. My apologies for being tardy. Um, wow. Happy Father's Day for all of the fathers. Want to say happy Father's Day to you all. And happy Juneteenth. Yep, Juneteenth 2021 is a national holiday now. And I'm just going to have to steal something from Trevor Noah. And if I can get a little light out here, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the wonderful man who is the wonderful love of my life on this wonderful Father's Day, Wilson Hale. Thank you so much for a little bit of light out here. But I got to steal something from Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah beautifully put it. He said, welcome to or happy Juneteenth 2021, the first national holiday that it is illegal to teach about in 16 states. And that's really where we are here in June, talking about Juneteenth. And I'm going to give you a little bit more information about that as we progress through the program. But yeah, believe it or not, they see Juneteenth as a part of the critical race theory that they are banning in so many school systems across the country, Alabama being one. Let's start here when we talk about Juneteenth. Is it a blessing or is it a subterfuge? Is it really all that it's been cut? The holiday, not Juneteenth or Freedom Day. I'm speaking of the holiday. Is this national holiday a blessing or a subterfuge? And I don't mean from the president, and I don't mean from Congress. I mean the fact that individuals are who really have an issue with this holiday, saying it's okay. Yeah, let's have a national holiday. Is it something that they really want, or are they doing this so that they can cover up other things? And here's what I mean. While we're taking our victory lap about Juneteenth becoming a national holiday, you may not have realized it, but our voting rights are under a huge attack. While we're talking about Juneteenth, demanding that Juneteenth be a national holiday, where our voting rights are being taken away from us little by little. We're being sabotaged with respect to our voting rights little by little. Speaking about that specifically, I want to talk about Georgia, or mention to you Georgia. Georgia just this week has announced that they're going to purge 100,000 voters from the registration files. 100,000 voters. Now, am I saying all of those 100,000 voters are African Americans, or that all 100,000 voters are individuals who would be in favor of a progressive, having a progressive voice? No, I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying, however, though, is that when in purging 100,000 voters, you're going to purge. I can guarantee you that some of those who are purged will be individuals who were purged, let's say, accidentally. Yeah. And those will be people who support a more progressive agenda. And I'm not completely to the left. I really am not. I'm more of a centrist. But I do know that those on the right, the far right, are against voter rights. Those on the far right have an agenda that supports this president, or the previous president, Donald Trump, and that he has no purpose in making sure that African Americans have a right to vote and a clear opportunity to vote, irrespective of where they live, irrespective of their zip codes. And I'm going to be getting a little bit more detail about whether or not this is a subterfuge, because we have attorneys general from several states: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, from Arkansas, Kentucky, Idaho. All of these attorneys general have signed a letter urging their school systems in their states to ban the critical race theory from being taught. And that's what Trevor Noah was talking about when he said, welcome or happy Juneteenth, the first national holiday that is illegal to be taught in schools, because Juneteenth teaches the truth. It teaches our children to think critically about, when you talk about slavery ended in 1865. Well, really, did it really end in 1865? And what had to be done to ensure that all enslaved, all of the enslaved were free? So where this critical race theory is not something that is that they're trying to ban. It's not something that is racist at all. All it's saying is, if you tell our children about slavery, tell the whole story about slavery. If you tell our story, if you want to tell the story or the history of the Native Americans, tell the whole history of the story of the Native Americans. When I talk about the subterfuge, is it to keep your mind off of something else? We have these lawmakers going out of their way to keep us from teaching the real history of this country, while they're at the same time saying, yeah, give them Juneteenth. Well, during slavery, slaveholders had certain days that they would give their enslaved populations off, that they didn't have to work. Well, particularly the week between Christmas and New Year's, they were given time off. They could party. They were given special foods. That meant they were given foods that were actually meant for human consumption, as opposed to the other foods that they were routinely given. But they could party and they could drink to the point of drunkenness. No problem whatsoever with them getting drunk. They didn't have a problem with that at all. So that's why they gave them several days off to just party, dance, drink, do, roughhouse, whatever, to mask the resulting pain of any reflection they might have on their enslavement, of their situation. So they wouldn't just give them the time off so that they could meet, spend time together, talk, discuss, maybe reflect about where they were, how they could remedy the position that they were in. They didn't want them to do that. No. They said, okay, fine, we're going to give you a break. It's just like a machine. We got to stop, take care of the machine, do an overhaul, give it some downtime so that it doesn't wear out. That's all they were doing in those days when they gave them this time off, so that they could relax, so to speak. They, again, were giving them this time off to relax and get drunk and not think about the situation that they were in or how they could correct it. The same is being done today. We're being given a holiday, given a day off with that holiday. Are we indeed being hoodwinked in that? Are we going to allow that those in power to use that to hoodwink those of us who are struggling to correct the plight of the disenfranchised? It worked back then because they had no choice. They had no choice. And yeah, drink was a relief. What else could they do? So I understand, but there were still those who said, no, we need to talk. We need to plan. We need to organize. But for the most part, they drank, they ate, they were merry. And then when the next day came and it was time to go back to work, they went back in the fields. Let's not allow that to happen. That worked back then. It can't work now. It's up to us to make sure that it doesn't. Make sure that we don't celebrate Juneteenth or the fact that it is a national holiday to the point of numbness, let's make sure that we stay woke. Let's make sure that we stay alert, that we stay prepared to organize, to work, to get the things done that are necessary to move 5, 10 minutes at the most. Juneteenth, a national holiday, and really what it means. A lot of people aren't sure what that means when we talk about Juneteenth being a national holiday. When President Biden signed the bill into law that made Juneteenth a federal holiday, what it meant was that federal employees, a holiday is only it only has impact on the federal government or federal employees. So federal employees would get paid a paid holiday. If the holiday falls on a Friday, if the holiday falls on a Saturday, then they would get a paid holiday for Friday. If it falls on a Sunday, they would get a paid holiday for Monday. Well, currently things are a bit different, a bit more complicated when it comes to state and private sector employers, I should say. They don't automatically get the same holiday. Their employees don't get the same paid day off. Currently, if a state doesn't adopt Juneteenth or any other holiday that's a federal holiday for that matter, if the state doesn't adopt it as a holiday, the only employees entitled to having a paid holiday, again, as I said, would be federal workers. Private sector employers don't always follow the federal holiday lead or the federal government's lead in granting a holiday. There was a survey done for employers to give them feedback on which employers will follow federal holidays. And what that survey found was that 9% of respondents observed Juneteenth. This was as of this year. 9% of those who responded to this survey observed Juneteenth. Now, that's the same percentage as those who observe Indigenous Peoples Day. If you didn't know what that was, that's Columbus Day. That's right. And less than the 13% who observe Veterans Day, but it's still pretty close. So on average, employers who responded to the survey offer an average of about 9 fixed holidays annually for their employees. So this holiday for employers to say, well, I'm going to add another paid holiday. A lot of small employers can't do that. I was a small employer at one point. I couldn't have afforded to add holiday after holiday after holiday. That doesn't mean that they don't have any reverence for the day. It means that they, as a struggling small employer, they don't necessarily have the resources to allow that. Each individual state will need to determine whether Juneteenth will be added to their roster of holidays. I think there are 11 holidays for the state of Alabama. I could be incorrect in that, but I think that's correct. And so even the state says, well, at some point we can't continue to have one holiday after another. We can't afford that. We have work we have to do. I understand. But this year, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed into law signed a declaration recognizing Juneteenth as a state holiday to be observed this past Friday, June 18th, 2021. Now, that declaration does not cover any future Juneteenth recognition or making it a holiday in the future. The legislature would need to pass a bill and then have the governor sign that bill, making Juneteenth a permanent recognized state holiday. The Democratic caucus, I've learned, has recently stated that they're going to form a bill or legislation that would do just that. That would make Juneteenth a state holiday so that all state employees would have a paid holiday there. And then if that happens, then probably more businesses would follow suit. So just wanted to give you a little background on what the holiday means, and if it's something that you want, if you are looking forward to Juneteenth being a state holiday for Alabama, call your Congress people, hit them up on their Facebook pages and on their emails, and tell them that we are interested in having a state holiday. But at the same time, let's not get so complacent in our having a day of relaxation, a day that we can party and enjoy and celebrate, that we become numb to the needs of the community, where this would be really should be another day that we can find a purpose in getting some things done in the community where we would otherwise not be able to do that because we're working. And that would include registering more people to vote, working with nonprofits who work with those individuals who are disadvantaged or at-risk youth. There's so many things that we can do other than just sit, party, and eat, drink, and be merry. Not saying that that's a bad thing or that you shouldn't do it. We just want to make sure that we are staying on target of advancing the proliferation of our communities in a good way. I found something on Facebook that I want to share with you, and this is the last of the stories that I'm going to share on this podcast, and that is about history, speaking about history and the need for the critical race theory being taught in schools. And the critical race theory, as you hear me go through this, the critical race theory would have taught these things, would have taught all of these things, and would have taught our children how to think critically about those things in history, that those facts that we were given or that they're given about history, to think critically about that and ask critical thinking type questions. But here's what I found that I thought was so interesting, that it was no accident that you were told that Beethoven was white, that he was Caucasian, instead of being told that he was a mixed race Black man, as was Alexander Dumas, who was the author of The Three Musketeers and other great pieces of literature that we grew up reading. Alexander Dumas was a French Caribbean. He was French Caribbean. His mother was a Black Caribbean. It's not an accident that you learned that about Helen Keller. Not saying that we shouldn't learn about Helen Keller, a tremendous story, but we didn't learn. You learned about Helen Keller instead of learning about W.E.B. Du Bois, the great philosopher, the great lecturer. You learned about the Watts riots, the LA riots, but we didn't learn about the riots in Tulsa or Wilmington that tore up African-American communities that were thriving simply because they were thriving African-American communities. You know, it's not an accident that you learned that George Washington's dentures were made of wood rather than the teeth in those dentures being taken from slaves. That's right. You know, they give you a half truth. The plate of the teeth perhaps were made of wood. Didn't have plastic back then. But the teeth in that plate were taken from slaves. So if he lost a tooth out of the plate, one fell out, as I would think would happen, it would be replaced by teeth from slaves. These people were not dead. We're talking about slaves who were alive, had no anesthesia when they ripped the teeth out of grown men and women's mouths to provide an aesthetic dent of platures, an aesthetic plate of dentures, got that a little backwards, for the first president of the United States. It's not an accident that you learned about Black ghettos, but not about Black Wall Street. We didn't learn about Auburn Avenue or the 4th Avenue in Birmingham, Alabama. We weren't taught about the glory days of those areas in various communities. It's not an accident that we learned about the New Deal, but not about redlining. Of course, we should learn about the New Deal. It's an important part of history of reviving this country after the Great Depression. However, redlining followed that and prevented African Americans from being able to take advantage of the things that came out of the New Deal. And again, I don't have the time to go into great detail on this podcast about each of these, but if you don't know about something that I'm mentioning about redlining, perhaps, or about Auburn Avenue, do some research. Go to Wikipedia, go to Google, and start doing your research on these things so that you can know, and then you can share with your children. It wasn't an accident that we learned that Tommy Smith's fist in the air at the Olympics in 1968 was a protest. We understood. They taught us that he had his fist in the air after winning at least 2 medals. I think it may have been 3. But it's not by accident that you weren't taught that he was sent home by America. He was sent home the next day and stripped of his medals. They don't teach that. The critical race theory would. It's not accident that we are taught about black crime, black on black crime, or black crime, if you want to call it. We learn about that. We hear it every day in every imaginable capacity. But did you ever think, and the critical race theory would teach our children to think this way. Did you ever think, why is it that we never hear about white criminals being lumped together and discussed in terms of their race? White criminals that rob people, white criminals who rape people, white criminals who shoot and kill people, white criminals who commit domestic terrorism. We don't hear about that, but we hear constantly about black crime. You cannot hear these things over and over again and think critically if you're not taught to do so. You just receive it. Oh, yeah, we got a lot of black on black crime. Well, there's just as much white on white crime, but you're not taught that. Your children aren't being taught that. It's not an accident that you learned about states' rights being the real cause, the true backdrop for the Civil War. But you're not taught that slavery was mentioned 80 times. That's 80 times in the Articles of Secession. The Articles of Secession that was presented to the Union from the Confederate States, explaining why they were seceding from the Union. Slavery was mentioned 80 times. Why was it, if states' rights were the real reason for it, why not mention states' rights 80 times? Because that wasn't the real reason. If we were teaching our children that, they would think critically and question and push back. And I'm not talking about just black children. I'm talking about children of all races who are taught American history. White privilege is having history rewritten, having the privilege to rewrite history so that you don't have to acknowledge uncomfortable facts. Racism is perpetuated by people who refuse to learn or acknowledge this reality on both sides. We have a choice. We can choose to embrace the truth and teach our children true history and demand that it be taught. But up to and until it is, open up these churches, open up these private schools in the evening, and bring our kids back and teach them the true history of their heritage. Other cultures do it. We can too. Well, I am almost a half hour into this podcast. Again, I apologize for being late here today. If you just tuned in, my name is Valerie Hicks Hale. I am an award-winning journalist and an attorney, and I love doing talk radio. and now the podcast. I really enjoy giving people facts that they can use to transcend the problems in their community. We can talk about problems and solutions all day, every day, but I really want to be clear that I know none of this is made possible. We're not able to accomplish any of these things without the direction of the Lord, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, has to direct us. Um, and I know many people don't believe that, and that's fine. I support your right to believe or disbelieve whatever you want, but for me, that's my belief. And I think that as we get closer to understanding um, how Christ wants us to live, as opposed to just touting being Christians, we can pick up the mantle and do the work that we need to do to correct the issues in our community. I'm out of here. Thank you so much for listening to Taking It Black here on 987 KISS FM YouTube podcast. See you next week at I usually here at 12:05. See you next week, Sunday, 12:05. Bye. Okay.